Here's the tutorial you've all been waiting for, neon signs. Look how good this looks, and it was only about £75. Here's what you'll need. A drill with a 3 or 4mm drill bit, that's so that a wire can get through the hole. Then you'll need a soldering iron kit, an AC adapter and a little adapter to connect to the neon rope. Then you'll need these end caps with 2 holes and obviously the LED rope light. And you'll need some wire strippers, some super glue, I'm using this Acrylic super glue, a Stanley knife and some masking tape, as well as some 24 gauge speaker wire. To get your design, you need to look and find a font you like. I had a look onto font.com where you can just download it to a PowerPoint document, or you can use Canva like I am here and just mocking it up to see what it looks like. Save this as an image and then take it over to rasterbated.net to turn it into a poster that you can tape together. So here I'm just uploading the image, selecting what size I want it to be for the acrylic sheet that I've got, no effects, black lines I want, and then it will turn it into a PDF for you to print out and tape together. So now I've got an actual size, I've laid my acrylic sheet over the top and I'm going to draw out around the words so that I can then cut it out with a jigsaw. So I'm just using a jigsaw and some wood to clamp it down to my workbench. I'm using a blade that is suitable for plastic, but due to the friction of the movement, it does kind of fuse the plastic back together after it's cut it. But you just need to kind of snap the plastic away from where you've cut and then just file the edges like I have here. And this is what you're left with. I've gone round the letters quite closely so that it'll be a really bespoke sign. Just peeling the top plastic off, literally the most satisfying thing ever. So you're going to want to line it up over your words and then tape the ends of where you're going to drill holes. So you want to drill holes at the very edges of each letter. So the top of the G, the end of the G, and I'm just marking out here where the holes are going to go. And then I'll be using my 3 or 4mm drill bit to drill that hole for the wires to go through to the back of the plastic. So I'm just doing a couple here. Basically, the masking tape stops the plastic from splintering. So soldering irons. This is how you turn them on. This is the one I got off Amazon. I will link it in on my profile. And just you want to turn it on to a relatively high heat, and then just let it warm up on its own on its rest. So just to double check whether it's hot enough, you can just hold it against the solder and it'll start steaming if it's ready. This is a little pad that you want to make sure is wet because you can use it to wipe off excess solder on. When you get the soldering iron, it might come with a few different heads, and this is the one that I use. It's super pointy to get me right into the components of the light. Then I'm using this lead-free solder. It's 0.8mm. This is how the end of your rope light will come. I don't like these wires, but as you can see, the positive is on the bottom and the negative is at the top. So the negative is on the bit where the coloured light is, and the positive is at the bottom, which you're going to be sticking to the back acrylic. So you can either melt the solder on these components and take them off, or you can just cut. So these lines, as you just saw there, indicate where you can cut. If you cut anywhere else, you may cut through the component. Using wire strippers, take about 4 or 5mm of plastic coating off of your wires. This will expose the inner copper. And then what you want to do is grab your blade and carefully split the 2 wires apart. So just down the middle, you're just cutting the plastic, not the wire, and you want to peel them apart so that they are independent from each other. You then want to twist the copper ends of this wire so that they all the frays stay together. And if it's too long, just trim it. So those 2 wires you'll want to solder to these 2 little copper components inside that you can just about see there. One of the most important preparations you can do is draw yourself a guide as to how they're all going to connect to each other. So as you can see, the G, I'm starting from the inner G, going round, linking that to the outer one, and then as you can see, I'm just drawing out a guide how each letter is going to link. The first row is going to be on its own with a wire trailing down, and then the gym at the bottom, so the bottom row, is going to start at the G, go round all the way down this loop and cut off, and then going to start the connection again, so run the wire underneath, hidden, and then carry on with some sharp bends. and then have that wire trailing down as well. So this is super important because you want to make sure that it's all going to connect up properly and it's going to look neat. Using the separated wire you've just prepped, feed them into one of the end caps, so the little plastic things with 2 holes in. You want to feed them in from the blunt end, so not through it, from the back of it, if that makes sense. So feed it through. You don't need to feed through much. And then you want to prep your first piece. So you want to cut it to length. Using your guide, you can estimate how long you want your piece. Make sure you're cutting on the lines I showed you a minute ago. Here you can see I'm cutting a small chunk out of the side to allow it to bend properly. So here, I want that sharp bend, so I've cut a small V out of the white side of the rope light, not the one with the stripe down it, to allow it to bend. This way you're not cutting through the components and you're just taking out some of the plastic. Here you can see it better up close. So again, you don't want to be cutting the striped side, you want to cut the flat side. So a little bit about these components. They have positive and negative sides. So the one that is facing the bottom, so the flat bottom, that's the positive side, and the one where the tubing is the negative side. On the wires, you can see that they are actually very slightly different, even though they're see-through. One of them, as you can see here, has a white stripe down it. That's the positive. The one without is a negative. So the one with the stripe needs to go on the bottom, and the one without the stripe needs to go on the top. So the bottom being the white side and the top being the pink side. Now here's the fiddly bit, actually soldering them to these components. So you want to get your wire ready and, being as dexterous as you can, hold the wire in place whilst you're holding the soldering iron and the tubing, and melt a little bit of solder, as you can see I'm doing here. You want to get it right to the tip if possible. Place the wire on top of the component, and you want to make sure that these 2 wires are not touching each other inside. And then you want to just dab your solder on top of these to melt it in place. Give them a little tug to see if they're loose. If they're fine, then you're ready to put the end cap on, like so. Then you want to feed those wires through the hole you pre-drilled, so the entry point of your letter, and then you want to feed it up back through the next hole for your next join. So here you can see I actually cut the wire quite short. I've stripped them back, and I'm just double checking and testing them to make sure that the light does work before I start soldering onto the next piece. You'll want to do this after every piece you connect. And here's me cutting the inner G. So just soldering it to those 2 pieces of wire. I'm being super fiddly with this because I want it a snug fit. Putting the end cap on, cutting it where it needs to bend, and then I'm getting my glue, and I'll show you what to do next. So I'm using Gorilla Glue Super Glue here. What you want to do is get the brush version because it makes life so much easier, and you just want to paste a small amount of glue on the white, so the flat white base. Air it for a couple seconds, and then you want to stick it straight down like I'm doing here, and apply some pressure. So you can see the inner G, I have just left the end unconnected, and then it's connected to the big G, which I'm then connecting onto the A, if that makes any sense. And here I'm just capping that off, so I'm soldering the pieces on. I've got the end cap, which I'm just putting on here, and just getting it ready to glue down. I've cut enough length to reach the A, and now I'm just adding some glue to the G, ready to stick down, applying some pressure, waiting a few seconds until it's all stuck down. If there are any bits that seem a bit wobbly, you can just add a little bit more glue. And then you want to strip the ends of that, double check that it's working, and then you can drill your hole if you've not already for your next letter, and basically just repeat. So I'm showing you again a bit more slowly here. So the 2 ends that I've fed back up through where the A starts, I've added the little end piece, end cap, and I'm just working out how much excess wire I need to join the 2, because also I'm going to want a really tight snug fit. So I will trim these wires down a little bit so that there's not too much excess wire behind that I then have to hide. So here I'm just trimming those down to an acceptable length. I then need to strip them, which obviously is quite hard when the wires are so short, but you can always pull them out again, trim them, and then feed them back through the hole. So here I'm just lining up my next piece for the large part of the A. And here I want a really tight bend. So I'm just figuring out how I want to do that, whether I want to cut a little V or do it in 2 stages. I'm actually doing 2 different ways on the A's for this sign, because it's my first sign and it's just what I was kind of figuring out while I was doing it. So here I'm actually going to cut the piece and then join it to another one to make the other side of the A, whereas on the next A in Garage, I'm actually just doing that hairpin kind of bend with the V cut out, as I showed you before. So again, when cutting, you want to look for those little black dots on the striped side of the light, and those are the edges that you can actually cut. If you cut between them, then you are losing a component. So you want to cut the nearest possible cut point, which might be a little bit over or a little bit under where you want, but you can make it work. Now we're on to a tight hairpin bend of the middle of the A. So here I'm going to be cutting out a V section, or a little bit more than a V, so that I can bend it in a really tight shape. Once it's bent and once the light is on, you won't even notice that you've cut anything out of it. It'll be seamless. And then just keep going. So follow your draw pattern, how you're going to connect each one, cut your little V's out where you need to, and test each letter as you go. Here I've moved on to the lower part, so I've already taken off an extra long piece of wire from the top, and then the bottom piece I will have a piece trailing off as well. The importance of testing as you go also shown here, where I tried to be clever and join the 2 pieces of the Y through the actual light by poking a hole through, and it did not work. A wire came loose, and here's me trying to fix it by cutting the wire, drilling 2 holes either side of the Y, and then starting again and gluing them down so that they all work and look pretty. To make sure these are connected, I actually plugged them in and connected them the whole time, which isn't really advisable because as you're touching the live wires, you are sending current through your body. When that's done, you can start gluing the wire on the back to hide them behind the letters. As you can see here, I've tried to hide them as best as possible with only the connections showing through. And then I've got the long cables coming off of both, trailing, which then will connect to this adapter piece. You want to connect the 2 positives to the positive and the 2 negatives to the negative, and then you'll want to solder them together, but you do not want them to touch because that will cause a spark and short out the light. So here you can see I've used some electrical tape to tape up the positive and negative wires, and then I'm going to cover it all. Here I've drilled some 5mm holes so I can mount it on the wall with some screws. And are you ready for the final product? Here it is. Are you ready? I'm literally obsessed with this sign, especially for a first attempt as well. So proud of myself. Be sure to follow me on all my channels, subscribe to my YouTube, follow me on Instagram, and I will keep giving you some more tutorials like this.